role, because for journalism, content is everything, and getting stories and access to people. And PRs play a huge role in that, because they are who connect you with who's in town, who's available to talk, and certainly content, stories that come up, things that they might not know if it's a story, they might have a particular idea and they'll come to you and it's like, well, no, actually that's not very good, but that's not going to work for us. But then in the course of that conversation, it can be surprising what angles can develop for that. So certainly when you're looking for people, access to people, whether it's through interviews, features, or them writing for the paper, and also stories, PR is certainly a big part of my job.
Yeah, look, I would agree with that. I mean, especially in the digital world, it's a very, very hungry beast, and we would probably push through about 100 stories a day. So if anybody can give me a story, it's just one less that I have to go out and find. So it's very much about, I suppose, knowing what brand you're pitching to, rather than just sort of blanket pitching. So if somebody comes to me with a story that is going to work on digital, that's good for my audience, that I know is sort of got a short turnaround time, because I'm in digital journalism, I'm not looking 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months ahead like a lot of the magazines do. If all of those things sort of line up, then I'm pretty happy to talk to them. Obviously, there are different times of the day, which I think we'll probably talk about later, but yeah, I mean, a phone call and email is certainly, no one's ever going to push a really good story off, that's for sure.
So we have a whole lot of small businesses here. What's the best way for them to approach you as a small business to secure coverage, whether it's a community and things like that?
Well, I think getting in contact directly with a journalist, a reporter, is always a really good starting point. For me, as opinion editor, certainly if someone has something that might work in opinion, they're more than welcome to get in contact with me. But I think reporters are a really good starting point. And also news local, so the local papers, that is a really good starting point if you've got a good story and you're not sure where to go with it. I think especially in the digital age, news local is getting a really good run. So we're talking about the local papers, the Inner West Courier, the Hillshire Times, the Manly Daily. It's amazing the stories that can get national traction, not just statewide traction, national traction out of there. There was a recent example, there was a story in the local Mossman paper, and it was about a North Sydney school where they were monitoring school lunchboxes, and so the teachers obviously wanted to discuss this, and that was a story that I know I picked up at the Telegraph and got picked up by a lot of people, became a national talking point. All of the morning shows and were talking about it. So that probably just started with someone presumably from the school talking to an education reporter at a local paper. So I think sometimes think small, because in this era of things going viral, obviously can't guarantee things are going to go viral, but if it's a good story, it will definitely get picked up. And in terms of the best way to approach, it really depends on the person. For me, I prefer email, because I am really busy and I don't always get to answer my phone, and I very rarely get to check voicemail. The person that I work with closest at the Daily Telegraph, he and I never leave voicemails on each other's phone. We just ring and you see the missed call and you know that they've tried to get in contact with you. I would never ever leave a voicemail on his phone, and he wouldn't leave one on mine. And obviously that only works between the two of us, but I'm just offering that as an example that, at the risk of sounding like we have a massively inflated view of our its importance, because obviously everyone is busy, but we are just so time poor in the modern media that really the time just to listen to a voicemail, it's not worth it. It's just easier to see a missed call. So for me, definitely, and most of the people that I work with, an email is a really good way to get in contact, and then by all means follow it up with the phone call.
Yeah, that would be the same for me. Email and then follow it up on a phone call. I was saying to Sarah in the cab on the way over here, though, the phone call has to come pretty quickly after the email. Leave me enough time to look at the email. Some people call after half an hour and go, "Have you seen that email?" And I'm looking at my inbox and there's 50 emails. I haven't even got to that yet. But then similarly, please don't leave it a week, because by a week I've forgotten as well. So probably like a day, 2 days is probably a good time to do the follow-up call. And I think the thing we sort of keep coming back to here, we're talking about a story, and I think that's what a lot of PR people sort of miss. They push product or the brand or, you know, the message of the company. And we're never going to write that because that's just writing a press release and never do that. So it's finding the story in your product. So, you know, is there a case study that you can give us of a, let's say that your product is sort of sleeping bags for kids or something. Can we talk to some kids about, you know, their favourite sort of characters, or can we talk to the mum who developed it because her kid was looking for something to keep him warm at night, or can, you know, is your business built between two sisters who happen to have started an online business from scratch, or did you start the business because you got divorced and you had no money? Like, think about the story, because that's where you'll get the coverage, because then the brand story is included within that. But just coming out and saying, hey, why don't you do a story about sleeping bags? I would say, why? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about the way you respond. How important is it for so many small businesses to be on your radar and just maintain that relationship with you as a business?
Well, I think that's very important, and I think, you know, targeting who you're talking to is a big part of it. You know, Melissa said before, you've got to know who you're speaking to. That sort of blanket email is definitely a big no-no. So even if you are actually sending the same idea to a few different journos, don't let them know. It's sort of like, you know, two-timing on someone on a first date. Don't let them know that you're seeing someone else, because they will get their back up. At some point, you're going to have to disclose that. If there's interest from someone, you need to then say, well, you know what, I did actually send this to the Herald and the Oz. If you're interested, I'm going to let them know, call them off. You know, that's really just a courtesy and very good, because if you go to someone with a so-called exclusive angle and it turns out not to be exclusive, then you have pretty much burnt that contact and they won't trust you again. But, you know your product. I sometimes still get emails addressed to me saying, would you like to write this in Sydney Live? Now, Sydney Live is a section that was made defunct 8 years ago. So straight away, I think, well, why would I even bother reading the rest of your email? You obviously don't know the product, being the Daily Telegraph. You don't know our audience. You've got no clue who's working there. You know, it would be like me ringing, you know, State Parliament and saying, I want to talk to the Premier, I want to talk to Barry O'Farrell. And they'd be thinking, Barry O'Farrell isn't the Premier. You're obviously an idiot. You're not keeping up. It's just, again, it's just about courtesy. It's just about showing a little bit of respect. So do your homework. Find out who you're calling or who you're emailing, and then, as Melissa was just talking before, it's really in your best interest to really target. Don't just send a thing saying, oh, sure, yeah, we've got these sleeping bags. Have a think about it and think, well, yeah, there might be something. Maybe there's a good story in how sleepovers have changed, that parents don't want kids sleeping on bunk beds anymore because they're a hazard or something. You know, that's a really good story that might picked up, and then you are still getting your product. You've got to think laterally about coverage, I think.
I agree with Sarah. I mean, I'm not quite sure what you mean by sort of maintaining relationships, but the days of sort of whining and dining people are so like 30 years ago. Nobody has time to go out to product launches or to lunches or to any of that sort of thing. So, which is good news because it means it's a lot cheaper for everybody. But, you know, I think just maintaining a nice, positive relationship with people is probably the best way to do it. You know, if there's a no, it's no problem, thank you very much. You know, I'll come back again with another idea in a little while. You know, is it calling up the people just to say, hey, I'm just wondering, it's coming up to Christmas time, are you looking for anything that I can help you with? It's sort of got to be a little bit like a give and take in that way, I guess. It's just maintaining a nice, positive relationship without being pushy or, you know, yeah, like I said, there's no need to kind of do anything extravagant these days. It's really just about, look, I know you're looking for content, I know you're looking for stories, I can help.
Now, Sarah, you mentioned that reporters are a great contact. In terms of who they can approach at interview publications, is it the reporter, is it the editor, is it yourselves? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think in a newspaper, the news desk is always a good starting point. So you can ring through and ask to speak to the news desk, or you could just call and ask, where should I email? So if you were, you know, looking at building a long-term relationship, you probably utilise those contacts. So you would know that it might be news@dailytelegraph.com.au, or you go to the local paper and find out who to target there. But if you wanted to get more specific, I think a reporter is a good idea. So if it's a particular round, I mentioned, for example, the education story in one of the local papers, you know, get to know the reporters just by their byline. And, you know, journalists respond quite well to flattery, I've got to admit, goes a long way in our profession. So if you, get their name right, send them a note and go, hi, Jerry, I see you did that story last week on blah, blah, blah. I thought you might be interested in this. Just, again, making sure that they don't feel like they're sort of the receiving end of just an anonymous blanket email. I think do your homework, and in terms of, to the question, get in contact with the editor. No, I mean, at my paper, it's hard for me to get in to see the editor. I mean, these are probably the most time poor people in the country. You know, it's obviously CEO. You don't call up a company and really get asked to be put through to the CEO. So I think the more senior people, it's not a class thing. It's not like you feel, I shouldn't talk to the CEO. It's just realistically, they're just not going to have time to get on it. So I think, going for reporters is probably a good idea because they are there looking for stories and they'll probably be a little bit more accessible than more senior editors.
And I totally agree with that. And it's not hard to find these people's contacts either. A lot of times people always say, what's that person's email address? Any newspaper will have the byline of the person who wrote that story on it. And then 9 times out of 10, their email is going to be the same across all of the companies. So if you look at News Corp, for instance, it's always our first name, our last name at news.com.au. And that's a pretty easy thing to work out. It's the same with the magazines. If you look at any sort of magazine at the front of the book, it'll always sort of have, the contents page, but it'll also have sort of the roll call of everybody and what they do. And all you've got to do is look at that, find their name, and then work out sort of the email addresses. And you can always call up the companies and just ask the person who's on the desk, I'd like to send an email to this person, I've got a story ID, what's their email address? They'll never say no. So it's really actually quite easy to find people's contact details for this kind of stuff.
Exactly, and also I think, with social media, people get in contact with you that way too, failing all else. I'm sometimes checking my Twitter feed, like a radio producer, it's very big on radio, for example, but they'll send a message saying, what's the best way to get in contact with you? And they will normally follow you, with the inference being that if you will then follow them back if you don't want to put your email out on Twitter. So, don't be shy to follow up those ways also.
Now, you mentioned radio, you mentioned magazines, and I know between the two we have extensive experience across all different platforms. So let's talk about some of these platforms and how to approach media on those platforms. So with radio, I know that there are different programs throughout the day. It's the radio producer, you need to get in touch with it, it's fast-paced. What kind of advice can you give on approaching people on radio? Sarah,
Well, I think radio is probably quite like news.com.au in that it's this big mammoth beast that has to be fed. It's turning over copy very, very, very quickly, or content, I should say, obviously talking about radio. And I think also it's very pacey, like digital media. So they are always looking for good stories. And with radio, obviously it depends what station you're talking about, but there is a strong community feel to radio. If you're looking at, say, a station like 702 ABC Sydney, it's got that very old school feeling. It's got a feeling that people have, got the old wireless on their kitchen bench and that they want to feel hooked into the community. I mean, I would imagine that something like that is a really fertile ground for people, local businesses to get in contact with, because they're always looking for good local characters, local stories. Again, it's got to be authentic and there's got to be a real story there. They're not just going to give you free airtime. But I think radio it's a really powerful way of connecting with people. And again, don't send a producer a 200-word email. Just get in contact, be really quick, say, look, I've got this funny story, something happened yesterday. If you want to talk about it, I've got, 2 people that were there and they can talk about it. Offer them the talent, which is basically people that can go on air. That's what they refer to by talent. So if you've got someone that can speak, whether it's going on TV or going on radio, that will go a long way to help, because basically you're doing half the job for them, and everyone likes that.
And with TV now, you both have experience on TV. I know time is quite tricky with TV. How should they approach a TV edition?
TV is a little bit of a difficult one, just because it depends what exactly you're pitching. I mean, if you're pitching something that, say, is for Christmas time, then you would probably be wanting to look at pitching it to them almost now. Like they would be planning those shows quite far in advance. I think something like, Valentine's Day and Easter and all those kind of things, you can sort of get in touch with them quite early. But if you're looking at something that's happening to go on in the news now, then you probably want to get in touch with them a day out. I mean, they would be playing those shows the day before. I mean, I'm talking like breakfast TV and things like that. So I guess you've just got to work out what your story is, again, like always, and then work out what you think, the best sort of timeline to approach people is with. But I would approach them the same sort of way that we would approach the Telegraph, probably.
Do you have anything to add to that, Sarah?
No, look, I agree with all of that. And I think the other thing is to probably just reiterate the point earlier in that, just be careful about playing people off against each other in TV. Like, for example, Channel 9 and Channel 7, the Today Show and Sunrise. I mean, that is a really bitter rivalry there. And I know a lot of agents and PRs have burnt relationships there by trying to get someone on both shows. And they are really looking over their shoulder at one another. And so I think you need to make that person feel special. So sort of go to 7, if that's who you're going to go to, and say, look, we'd rather come to you, blah, blah, blah. Again, don't be inauthentic, but let it be known that you have come to them first and that you're not taking the conversation any further for now. Because if they get wind of it, that you're sort of trying to get the same story on both shows, probably what will happen is you'll just get dumped by both, because that is, that competition is a really big part of how they operate.
And I think radio is quite similar to online, and TV as well, in that it's a daily news cycle, so they're looking for fresh content daily, or something like a magazine or a newspaper might have a bit more of a lead time with those special features. Now, we've spoken about online and about newspapers. What about a magazine? They obviously have longer lead times, they have special issues. How can they approach a magazine?
Yeah, the lead time for magazines is one of the biggest differences. We were just talking on the way over, I file a column for a Sunday magazine and the deadline is 10 days out, and that is the last thing to go in the whole magazine. So the issue that, say, hits the stands next Sunday, probably planning for that started 2 or 3 months ago. So, to Melissa's point before about some of those special events, definitely plan in advance. So the glossy magazines, the monthlies like Marie Claire magazine, they would probably much be storyboarding right now, like their March issue for next year. They would be on deadline for that before Christmas, and they would be planning ahead. So definitely planning in advance is good there. And so the challenge there, of course, is finding content that will hold. So something that they can have, and that you aren't going to undermine that by going to other media outlets in the lead up. So I think it's about building trust there. But the good thing there is that they've got the luxury of a lot of time and space, and that might work really well if you've got quite a big, ambitious idea or story. To work with them can work out really quite well.
Yeah, exactly right. And then once again, just look who's writing what in the magazine. Often the same people will write the what's on sections, or the same people will write the tech section or the lifestyle section or whatever it is. And approaching those people is better than, say, just going to the deputy editor or the managing editor or somebody like that, hoping that they're going to send your email on. I think, it's to our point before, if you really find out the people and approach them specifically, then, you're sort of halfway there, really.
Just before we open it up to the floor, so we'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions. Tell us about some of the best experiences you've had with PRs, when things just worked really well, that you were just like, yep, that's a story. I'm going to run with it because you're responding quickly. Do you have any experiences to share there?
I mean, I can think of a few specific examples where someone was just very savvy in terms of, obviously they had a goal, which was to promote a certain product or person, but that it was put to me in a way that I could see how it would work for us. So obviously they were quite smart in how they approached it. And I think also, to go back to that point about that tricky balance between being pushy and being proactive, I think the best relationships that I have are people that I know I can go to. So they're there and they're sort of hovering in the background, if you like, but they're reliable. And I know, there's a woman that sort of runs a small PR business on her own, and she's just got a lot of clients. And I know if I go to her and say, look, I want to find someone that can talk about this, can you find them? And she will come back as someone that can deliver the job, and she didn't push them on me 6 months ago when I didn't need them. Or if she did, and I said, no, I don't need that right now, she just kept the relationship going. So I think it's just about making known the content that you've got, the access that you've got, but also keeping that relationship bubbling away, and that when they get to you, actually understand they've got to turn it around. This is sort of probably the frustrating thing from your point of view, is that we might just shrug our shoulders and, not reply to emails for about 6 months, and then all of a sudden you'll get a call saying, okay, I've got some space tomorrow, and you either think, where were you 6 months ago? Or you go, yeah, fine, I'm going to make it work, and I'm actually going to turn that around and make it happen for you today. And that actually just happened just last week with the PR, and I think that's really good. It's just a really good, sensible approach, and it worked out for them, and it worked out for me.
Now, I can remember a campaign, but one that worked for us was an anti-smoking campaign, and the PR came to us and said, look, we've done we're doing a big launch on Thursday, and it's going to be sort of unveiling our big anti-smoking campaign. Now, part of that campaign is that they got Rachel Finch, who's a model, to sort of age herself with Photoshop and stuff and make her look really old, and it was sort of like what she would look like, when she was 30 if she'd been smoking. Now, that launch and that campaign launch certainly wasn't exclusive. But the pictures of Rachel Finch were to us. So they came to us and said, we're launching this on Thursday, there'll be a lot of chatter around it. I've got these exclusive pictures of Rachel Finch looking like a haggard old cow, and you can put them on your website, you'll be the only ones that have them. And we went, great, perfect, that sounds amazing. And it was the splash story that day on our site. What we call the splash is sort of like the front cover of the telly. So it's the main story. That was huge coverage for them. And it worked because I think they came to the campaign was happening on the Thursday. They came to us on the Monday. I think it started off with a call to our lifestyle reporter who said, yeah, that sounds like a really great story. Now, sure I have it exclusively, you sure I have it exclusively? They said, yes, you do. And then they delivered the images, they delivered the copy, some quotes from Rachel, and then boom, the story was up on Thursday. So that's a really nice way to see that play out. I can't
There's a
sort
lot
of
of preparation involved there, and they obviously gave you images, which is, and images are.
Yeah, I mean, it just had the combination of it was timely, it was exclusive, they went to the right person, and it was actually good content that we knew our readers would like.
And they knew their audience too, didn't they? Which was really cool.
Yeah. So not everybody's going to have Rachel Finch, obviously, but it's just an example of that's sort of, the pinnacle of sort of how a PR pitch might work, yeah.
And in terms of some bad experiences or some no-nos that they shouldn't be doing, do you have any experiences you can share? Just really frustrated you that made you go down the lake?
Well, I think, again, sorry to be repetitive, but just that really unfocused blanket coverage. I looked at an email the other day, went to print it out and bring it today, and I don't know if you've got the same one, Melissa, but it actually said, dear unspecified media contact, and then went on to pitch something, and the frustration was it actually could have had some merit. For a certain demographic, probably not for me, which is why, I thought, well. But then, to their credit, this person did send out an email a couple of hours later going, dear Sarah, obviously I realise your name is Sarah, and not unspecified media contact. And I thought, well, I didn't reply to them, so obviously other media had gone to them going, well, if that's how you're going to start your email, our relationship is pretty much ended before it began, which is obviously why they went into damage control with people like me. I don't think anyone in this room needs to be told that is obviously a big no-no. That is an extreme example, though, of something that does happen with people that don't realise that they're really, putting their foot in the antithesis of that great Rachel Finch example, or just be people that aren't focused, aren't really coming up with an idea. And the thing is, it's a waste of their time because they're hitting 50 people with this sort of half-baked idea. Much better use of their time would be focus in on something and get names right. I mean, I have a difficult name, the way it's spelled. Misspelling of my name doesn't overly bother me, but call me by a name, not unspecified media content.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of notice, and most of them are pretty obvious. But I mean, one of the things that I would say is that I often get sent things because I'm obviously on some kind of blanket PR email, and it's just a waste. It's a waste for me. It's a waste for the person who's packaging these full DVDs or whatever it is together, and it's a waste of these people's sort of products. So if you're going to send something, make sure you're only sending it because the person wants to do the story, or you've already sort of maybe put in a call or an email and said, look, I'd like to send this across just so you know it's coming. I sort of don't want to sound ungrateful or anything, but there's nothing worse than sort of just getting all this mail and it's just, a lot of the time it just goes in the bin. And I often think, and I feel sorry for the people who are sending this stuff, So if you are going to send something, just make sure you're targeting it to the right person and you're maybe pre-warned that it's coming.
We'll open it up to questions now. Does anyone have any questions? Yep, back.
In terms of sending information, obviously, I'm not a journalist. So when we're providing information to journalists, what sort of information do you want? Sort of almost a story kind of written and you can just maybe modify the look as well, the salient points, or what's the sort of, or what do you guys need in order to build a story?
No, sending a story, no, because the journalist will write the story themselves. Well, I'm opinion editor, so that's slightly different, because if you were submitting an opinion piece, then yes, that would be right. So you might be writing something from the first person account that something happened, say over grand final weekend, that this happened in the local neighbourhood, and you might think that it's something that we would consider someone being a representative of the local community. But that really only applies to opinion. Writing a story and sending it into a journal, that more reeks of advertorial, and so to a lot of journalists that would just be an automatic no. So I think smaller is better. I just think condense the information, the basic details, but get the hook. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about the story. So, what is the hook? What is going to catch the attention of a time-poor journo that is always looking? Every journo is always looking for the next big story, however busy they are. And if you can somehow cut through all of that white noise, that's really your challenge, is that they look at it and go, this isn't just some blanket press release, this person is actually onto a good idea here and they've come to me.
And the journalists will come back typically and ask a question.
That's right, they would follow it up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would very rarely read a press release, so just put everything you can into the email. It's not something like, I don't open PDFs, I don't even know how to do that. So just put it all into an email, make it really short and sharp and kind of punchy, and then say, yeah, look, I've got heaps more information on this, I've got some case studies, I've got this, whatever you want, come back to me, I'm here, I can provide the information to you. Yeah.
Any other questions I can do? Yep.
So if you are a business owner and you don't have time to, because it's obviously takes a lot of time to do PR, you don't have time, which PR agencies would you suggest are better than others as journalists and editors? That's a good question.
It depends what your product is, I mean, I would say if you have a fashion product, go to the PR agencies that typically deal with fashion products. So you're looking at things like a Two Birds Talking, they're very good, or like obviously Sweaty Betty is very well known in the fashion PR industry. So go to people who actually know that sort of genre, rather than just try to go to anybody who you think's good. Look at stuff that they've done for other clients in the past. So look at how they run a Facebook page. Look at people's campaigns who you think are really good. And it depends on them. With a lot of PR people, you don't have to sign up with them and sign your life away. You could say, look, I just want to run this campaign with you for 6 weeks and I'll see how it goes. I would always put a definite period in there so that you're not signed up for a really long time, and put really strict kind of targets around what it is that you want and what you want to get out of it, to make sure that at the end of the 6 weeks you can sort of look and cross-reference and make sure that it's what you wanted. But there are lots of sort of smaller PR companies out there who are doing a lot of great things on social, so buying Facebook ads, things like that. I don't have like a list of them off the top of my head, but if that's something that you want, I can put a list together for you and email it across.
Yeah, so I've got sleeping bags actually. So I've been sleeping bags, but they're kind of very cool. And then it's like a product which is like a first in global licensing. So it's not quite a fashion product, it's not quite so it doesn't kind of fit into a Sweat Betty, but it's also not like car, or it's not a, it's like it's not sort of fun, which is why I was asking the question.
There's also some sort of freelance PRs that have worked for big companies. I used to be a film writer, and some of those film publicists that were with, Warner Brothers or Fox are now out on their own. And I think they can sometimes do a really good job because they're, just taking on the job for you. Then they work quite hard. It wouldn't be sort of like, oh, we're just going to go to our 5 normal contacts. They would be cultivating relationships. I've certainly had PRs that I've known in the past come to me specifically and say, look, I just thought this might be something, and even if it doesn't work for me, I will often refer them to a colleague. So, but I agree with what Melissa said. You might find it good to look at campaigns or products that you thought have been done well, and then find out who was doing their publicity and sort of work backwards that way.
Just later here. Yeah, is there a preference there for you between dealing with PRs or dealing directly with somebody who's involved in the story?
I don't know if there's a preference necessarily. I suppose PRs just have the advantage of having the contacts, and so it's just that familiarity really, is that if the name pops up in your email, you sort of know who it is, as opposed to a name that you've never heard of. But again, I think if you were targeting a reporter, that's not necessarily such an issue. If you've got a good idea and you've got a good story, most reporters will listen, and it doesn't really matter who you are, because obviously when you're working in a newsroom, a lot of your contacts, they're not coming from PRs, they're coming from normal people, they're coming from citizens, neighbours, people that are bringing in a story. So I don't think you should feel intimidated or excluded by the lack of that PR. They're really just the third party, and they serve a really good role. But, and I'd say the same with the sleeping bags. If you can think of a good hook that would work, I don't think that you should feel shy about approaching people on your own necessarily.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And the only thing I would say, if you are going to do that, make sure you can back it up. So if the journalist does come back to you, make sure you're there and you're able to provide the images, or able to provide the case study, whatever it is they want. I mean, the only reason that you might look at a PR person is because you know that that's solely and wholly what they're doing, and that if I say I want something, then they'll turn it around. So as long as you can deliver on it, I don't really see, a problem with who it comes through.
That's a follow-on.
Yeah, I suppose also if you associate yourself with a PR firm that's been badly received with a news outlet before, you might actually be doing yourself more damage than good in that way.
Yeah, look, I think that's true. I think if the story is good, most journalists will look through whether it comes from a good PR or a bad PR, because we all know it's just a truism that if it is a good story, it will ultimately speak for itself. But that's definitely true, and there are some PRs that rely on stunts, and so it's more of a cynicism rather than anything, and it can be a lack of trust if it is someone that goes to everyone. You need to, again, it's just about building that trust, and agree with what Melissa said, you've just got to back it up. And if there was a sign of interest, you've got to honour that and be like, okay, I won't talk to anyone else.
Yes.
You've used this term a lot, and I realise it's quite variable, but what do you see as a good story? What is a good story?
For me, yeah, exactly. Look, I think a good story is something that is new, and that's why news is new. So it's not something that we've already all been talking about. It's something that is going to capture people's imagination, that they feel they haven't already read or heard or seen before. It's about anything that really is going to start a conversation or capture people's imagination. So to go back to that story that was in the local paper about the lunchboxes being monitored, I think that is a great story, because it speaks to community issue, it speaks to something that is happening right here in Sydney, and it's going to probably prompt outrage. I mean, the piece I wrote was as a parent saying, stay the hell out of my kids' lunchboxes. Like, unless they're smuggling drugs or weapons in there, it's really not your business. And are we at a point where, as a society, we're going to shame parents for smuggling smuggling a Mars bar into a lunchbox. Do you know what I mean? It's a story that has got a lot of social interest that people, you can imagine, just think about the people that you know, that they read the paper on the train or they read their the internet on their iPhone. What interests them? I think that's something that people forget about is you're a media consumer, so am I. What interests you? Would it interest your neighbour? Would it interest your family? Would it interest your friend? If it does, probably onto a story.
Yeah, look, I mean, we have 4 pillars at news.com.au. We say it either has to inform, inspire, advise, or entertain. If it could do all 4 of those things, beauty. Sometimes a story can. If it can do 2 of them, that's great. If it can do 1 of them, it can still get a run. So we're always aiming for the 4. But if you can try and make it hilariously funny, then that's sort of entertaining. If it can be something about a beautiful inspirational piece about a family that managed to pick themselves up out of the document, then that's a really nice inspiring piece, and that sort of speaks to heartbreak and the human element. Advice is sort of, okay, 10 ways to do your laundry better or whatever. If it's going to make my life easier in this really time-poor world, then that's a good story too. And then inform is obviously sort of just your main kind of breaking news. So that's where the new element, I suppose, comes in. Here's something you didn't know before, and here's why you should know it. So that's sort of what we, I guess, kind of work to, especially in digital. I think a story that has good visuals is always really good. The visual word is almost overtaking the written word these days. So if there's an interactive element to it, if there's a video, or there's pictures, or there's a quiz, or there's something that people can actually do, that always sort of works really well as well. And social stories are really popular online. If we think people are going to share it, talk about it, engage with it, that sort of thing can do well too. So yeah, that's sort of, I guess, from the digital side.
Yeah, lists can be good. I mean, that's a very digital, social media driven. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to start sending random emails like, here's 5 good ideas or here's 6 things. But the power of a list is something that very much traffics quite well. Surprisingly in print, but definitely digital. So it's just about thinking of how you might present a story as well. So if you can sort of think of something that could be shareable, like the 15 things that you really needed to know about laundry or sleeping bags or something like that, it's just going to give it a little bit of an edge as well in terms of cut through.
Any other questions? I had one quick one. You both mentioned social media a couple of times and how you check your Twitter first thing when you wake up. What other role does social media play in your current roles in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Do you push news out there? How helpful is that? What role does social media play in your job?
Well, I think for journalists, it sort of has two forms. So one is pushing your own content and the stories that you've commissioned out there and sharing them. That's a really big part, especially for the actual mastheads and the news.com.au or the Daily Telegraph Twitter handles. They are really there to be sharing and promoting content. And obviously they have a lot of followers, and on Facebook as well. That is how a lot of people see their stories. They might not even necessarily be logging onto a certain website, but they're just seeing it through their social media feeds. But for journalists, obviously it's also an information gathering resource, and that might not be something that is as useful to you as it is to people working within the media, but it's certainly a good way of gauging what other people are doing. And if you're not already on social media, I think a lot of people on social media are just watching. They're not necessarily engaged. It's amazing how many inactive users there are on Twitter, and probably what those people are doing is just they're basically that guy standing in the corner watching what everyone else is doing, and that can actually be a really useful information gathering tool.
Well, I think social media is hugely important for us. It's pretty much the most important thing for an online digital site. But from a brand's perspective, I went to a conference recently and it was really interesting where they were talking about how brands are now becoming their own content producers. So take Red Bull, for example. They've got like millions and millions of followers on their Facebook page, and it's because they never talk about Red Bull. They found themselves a niche, and that niche is extreme sports. And they talk about extreme sports on their Facebook page, and they post stories about extreme sports, and they get people who love extreme sports to talk about extreme sports, and that's how they manage to build that brand. So I think it's a really good way of thinking about it. So for instance, someone I know recently has developed a wine app, and instead of actually making their Facebook page, oh, we launched our wine app, isn't our wine app amazing? Oh, new release of wine app, and here's wine at 1.6 or whatever it is, no one cares. So what they've actually made that Facebook page about is wine. So they post stories about wine that are really interesting. They find other people posting stories about wine and post links to those stories. They ask people what they're drinking this week. They share pictures of really great wine, and then it becomes a community unto itself, and then you use those people to almost do your marketing and your promotion for you. So say you had the story about the 15 great laundry tips or whatever it was, there's nothing to say that you couldn't write that and put that on your own Facebook page and get that shared amongst your friends. And it's amazing how quickly that sort of stuff can kind of snowball and get out there. So that's what we try to do with our content, and I think that that's what brands should try to do with theirs too. Make it an experience, you know, for people, because that's what people are looking for on social. What people do on social is very different to what you do on, you know, on a digital news site, for instance. The stories that we put on social, the stories that get shared on social, are not necessarily the stories that we think are, you know, majorly important breaking news.
Yes.
How do you measure your performance as journalists?
That's a good question. In digital, it's very easy because you can see the numbers. So I can see at any one state, like time, how many people are reading the stories, what their engagement with that story is like, how far they're scrolling down the page, what they're clicking on after they've read that story, whether they're reading that story, they're leaving our site because it wasn't what they wanted. There is almost so many stats that can become a little bit all-consuming. So for us, well, for news.com.au, our measurement is that we want to be the #1 news site in Australia. So we're a free site, so we're about mass. We just want the most amount of people coming to our site as possible. And I can measure exactly by section, because I look after all the sections of those papers, how many people are coming to those sections. So for us, being #1 means the best way for us to get the most amount of advertising dollars on our site. So we have a sales team who work to their own sales sort of targets, but for me, the best thing I can do to help them bring in money is to get a lot of people looking at the ads on our site. So, I mean, that's probably a very, I guess, almost like practical way of looking at it. But as a journalist, you know, the times when you feel warm and fuzzy and when you've got a story and you just know you've nailed it and lots of people are looking at it and they're writing the comments that they love it and they're sharing it on social, and the person who the story is about gets back to you and says, oh, you know, thank you so much for that story, it was amazing. And, you know, they're the warm and fuzzies, or it gets picked up by media and other people are running your story, that's a really good day. That's when you go home and you go, that's a little red wine. So, you know, it's a bit twofold in a way, and unfortunately in digital media anyway, it's so measurable that it's sort of, you know, can sometimes get away from that moment of having a really good story.
Yeah, I think, you know, traditional print media is, it's a lot harder to measure. Obviously there are circulation figures and they are closely watched in newspapers and magazines. It's very different beast to digital, and obviously I also do work in digital, but you know, the newspaper, especially when it's a masthead like the Daily Telegraph, it's very hard to actually answer that question. I think how the stories are picked up. I think with a paper like the Daily Telegraph, it's sort of traditional brief is that it's the paper, like other papers, that sets the agenda. So if you might say, well, I don't read the Daily Telegraph. Well, you know, I don't know if anyone here's seen The Devil Wears Prada, but there's that famous scene where the Meryl Streep character says to a girl, you think you're above fashion, but trust me, what you're wearing, that blue jumper that you pulled out of the laundry bin somewhere, that was decided for you by the people on the catwalk. So I sometimes think the Daily Telegraph's a bit like that. You might think, well, I don't read it, but trust me. When the politician came out and did a press conference this morning, that was because they read in the Daily Telegraph. That radio that you heard about on the way in, that was probably from the Daily Telegraph. And that story that you watched on the Current Affair at 6:30, that was probably in the Daily Telegraph. So I think it's about a trickle-down effect, and certainly if you've got something that people are talking about or you've commissioned it, that's a big part of it. And it is hard to measure, but you know it's out there. And I think for me, a big part of it is just trying to showcase the diversity. When you've got a paper like the Daily Telegraph, people have very preconceived notions. I've been working there 9 years, but I've only been in my current role for a year, well, less than a year, 9 months. And a big part of it has just been trying to say, hey, you know, there's a lot of different people here. And if I connect with someone, they say, oh, well, I read that piece. I never thought I'd read that in the Daily Telegraph. Well, then I think, cool, job done.
I remember listening to Lachlan Murdoch give a speech not so long ago, and somebody asked him that basic question. They were like, what is the #1 thing that you want people to do in your media organisation? And his answer was be disruptive. And I thought that's such a great answer because it just speaks to so many things. It's that cut through, it's getting people to talk about your stuff, it's sort of invoking change, it's being different, it's being recognized, it's all of those things. And so that's what we sort of try to aim for, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure you guys would too. It would just be disruptive, be different, be the catalyst for change and movement, I suppose.
Okay. Unless there are any other questions, we might wrap it up there. So put your hands together for Sarah and Melissa. We have time for 5 minutes in case anyone wants to ask a question. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Oh, good, thank
Mine's just Melissa.